Don't you want to try the coffee I made just for you, sweetheart? My husband James asked, his lips curling into an odd smile that never quite reached his eyes. I sat at my sister-in-law Nina's elegant dining table in her grand Nashville home, where we gathered every month for our usual family brunch. The warm morning sun streamed through the large windows, casting a golden glow over the perfectly arranged dishes and silverware. The scene was picture-perfect, except for one thing: the coffee cup in front of me. Its dark liquid carried a strange, almost metallic scent that made my stomach churn. My name is Christina, and at 29, I never thought I would be in a situation where I questioned whether my own husband was trying to poison me. Yet, after 3 years of marriage filled with odd illnesses and countless incidents of so-called accidental food poisoning, I had learned to be extra careful, especially when Nina was around. She had a way of orchestrating situations that left me feeling humiliated or ill, all while wearing that same innocent, knowing smile. And today, James was wearing it too. "How thoughtful of you," I replied with a forced smile, my heart pounding. My fingers trembled slightly as I reached for the cup, bringing it close to my lips but stopping just short of taking a sip. The scent triggered a memory. A month ago, I had fallen violently ill after drinking tea at Nina's house. The doctors couldn't explain my symptoms, and Nina had been so insistent that she had made the tea the exact same way she always did. Across the table, Nina stirred her own untouched coffee, watching me intently with a faint smirk. "James has been getting really into coffee brewing lately," she said smoothly, her tone light but her eyes sharp. "He's been practicing different methods just for you." Something about the way she emphasized "for you" sent a chill down my spine. I had noticed James spending more time at Nina's house lately. He claimed they were planning something special for our upcoming anniversary, but something felt off. There had been too many hushed conversations that stopped the moment I entered the room, too many strange, unreadable expressions when I caught them exchanging glances. And now, this coffee, with its peculiar, unsettling scent. Slowly, I lifted the cup, pretending to take a sip while secretly watching their reactions. James and Nina locked eyes for the briefest moment, and that tiny exchange was all the confirmation I needed. A plan formed in my mind. Feigning distraction, I pulled out my phone and let out a small gasp. "Oh, would you look at that? I need to take a quick work call. Nina, would you mind if I use your study?" As I stood, I made my move. With a calculated stumble, I reached toward the table as if to steady myself. In the confusion, I switched my cup with Nina's in one swift motion. "Oops, I'm so sorry," I exclaimed, straightening up with an embarrassed laugh. "I can be such a klutz sometimes." Nina waved off my apology with a tight smile. "Just try not to break anything in my study." I nodded and walked away, my pulse racing. Once inside the study, I positioned myself where I could still see the dining room through the slightly open door. I gripped the edge of the desk as I watched Nina lift the cup to her lips. My stomach clenched. A part of me wanted to shout, to stop her, but I needed to know the truth. She took a sip. Seconds passed, then I noticed it, a small tremor in her hand. She set the cup down, her expression shifting, the color drained from her face. "James," she said, her voice suddenly weak, "something's wrong." James looked up from his phone, his expression shifting from confusion to horror. He jumped to his feet, knocking over his chair in the process. "Nina, are you okay? What's happening?" Nina's hands were shaking violently now. She tried to stand but stumbled, clutching the edge of the table. "James, what did you put in that coffee?" she gasped, her voice laced with panic. Stepping out of the study, I held up my phone, its camera recording. James was at Nina's side, his face ashen. "That wasn't supposed to be your cup," he whispered, but in the eerie silence of the dining room, his words carried clearly. Nina's wide, terrified eyes met his. "Call an ambulance," she pleaded, her breath ragged. "I can't." I dialed 911, my voice calm despite the chaos. "We need an ambulance at 1542 Maple Grove Drive. My sister-in-law is having a severe reaction to something in her coffee. She's conscious but experiencing tremors." James stood frozen, panic-stricken, while Nina's body writhed on the floor. The sight filled me with a sick realization. This was never about me personally, it was about control, about power. Nina coughed, her voice weak but venomous. "You switched, you knew." "Ma'am, the ambulance is on its way," the dispatcher assured me. James started backing away, shaking his head. "Nina, Stop talking, you don't know what you're saying. But she did. With a sudden surge of anger, she tried to push herself up. You idiot, you said it would just make her sick, just enough to miss the board meeting next week. You promised it wouldn't be traced. A cold wave washed over me. The board meeting, where I was supposed to present a major proposal for a high-profile client, the same client Nina had been desperately trying to win over at her competing firm. Everything clicked. The tea. Nina gasped, her body trembling violently. It was supposed to keep you home during the Johnson contract presentation, but you went anyway, James said, just enough to make you unreliable. She clutched her stomach, wincing. It was all about your reputation. The sound of sirens filled the air outside. The paramedics burst through the door, quickly moving toward Nina. I stopped recording and sent the video to my private email, then to my lawyer. James stood motionless, watching as his carefully laid plans crumbled before him. I turned to him, my voice unwavering. I'm sure the doctors, and the police, will be very interested to know exactly what was in that coffee. James opened his mouth, but no words came out. For the first time since our marriage began, I saw true fear in his eyes. I played the recording from brunch and showed her the text messages I had saved. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the hospital machines in the background. Detective Mendoza flipped through her notes, her expression unreadable. Mrs. Bennett, she said, looking up at me, you mentioned previous hospitalizations. Can you tell me more about those incidents? Taking a deep breath, I reached for my phone again and opened a document I had been carefully maintaining for months. The first time was in February, right after a dinner at Nina's house. I experienced severe stomach pain and dizziness that lasted for hours. The second time was in April, the tea incident. I felt weak and disoriented. Then again in June, after breakfast with them. Each time, the symptoms were slightly different, just enough that doctors couldn't pinpoint a specific cause. Detective Mendoza's eyes narrowed as she scanned my notes. And you've been keeping records ever since you started noticing a pattern? I hesitated before reaching into my purse and pulling out another phone, a backup I had started carrying for safety. I also recorded conversations when I was around them. I wanted proof. I have several recordings of Nina and James discussing their plans. They were always careful not to be too obvious, but their intentions were clear. I played one of the recordings, and Nina's voice came through clearly. The Henderson account is worth millions. James, we can't let her ruin everything we've worked for. Just stick to the plan. A few days of illness should be enough. Then came James's response, his tone low but menacing. I've got something stronger this time. She won't make it to the presentation. Detective Mendoza's expression hardened as she listened. From where I sat, I could see through the hospital window into Nina's room. My sister-in-law was now awake, looking noticeably less confident than she had at brunch earlier. The hospital is running toxicology screens, the detective informed me. Dr. Phillips has already identified several substances in your system that don't occur naturally. We're going to need samples from your home as well. Before I could respond, a commotion erupted down the hallway. James was arguing with security guards, his voice laced with desperation. I need to talk to my wife. Christina, please, you don't understand. We were trying to protect you. Detective Mendoza quickly stepped between us, blocking his view of me. Mr. Bennett, you're not helping your case. We have substantial evidence of premeditation. James let out a hollow, humorless laugh. We were just trying to slow her down. She was taking on too much, handling all the major accounts. Nina said if we could just make her take a break. By poisoning her? Detective Mendoza's voice was sharp, cutting through the tension. James paled, shaking his head. No, we never meant to. Then what exactly did you mean to do? I asked, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. When you put something in my coffee this morning, what was supposed to happen? James's silence was damning. Through the glass, Nina sat up slightly, watching the scene unfold with fear and calculation. I could almost see the wheels turning in her head, searching for a way out of this. Detective Mendoza turned to the security guards. We need both of their phones. Also, make sure officers are posted at both doors. No one leaves until we have the toxicology results. Moments later, Dr. Phillips entered Nina's hospital room, holding a tablet, her face grim. The detective and I followed her inside, while James remained outside, his hands shaking. Dr. Phillips took a deep breath before speaking. The toxicology report confirms high levels of several substances in Mrs. Bennett's system. One in particular is a compound typically used in pharmaceutical testing. It's not something the general public has access to. Nina's face turned white. That's impossible. James said it was just something mild, just enough to make her feel sick. Mild symptoms? Detective Mendoza raised an eyebrow, flipping open her notebook. Like the ones your sister-in-law has been experiencing for the past 6 months? Before Nina could respond, another officer entered, holding an evidence bag. We found these in Mr. Bennett's desk at the Anderson marketing firm. Inside the bag were several small bottles, each labeled with clinical names and dosage instructions. There were also handwritten notes detailing symptoms and reactions. My stomach twisted as I realized the extent of their plan. You were tracking everything, like some kind of experiment. It wasn't like that, Nina protested, but her voice wavered. Then what was it? Detective Mendoza asked, holding up one of the bottles. Because these notes indicate you adjusted dosages over time. Did you know that at higher levels, these substances could be lethal? A long silence filled the room. Through the window, James sank into a chair in the hallway, his face buried in his hands. I exhaled, my mind racing. The Henderson account, it wasn't just about the presentation, was it? You wanted me gone permanently because the client specifically requested me as the lead. Nina's face twisted with frustration and fear. You were ruining everything. I built that client portfolio for years, and then you show up, and suddenly everyone wants to work with you instead. I looked at her, my heart pounding. So James said he could fix it, by killing me? The weight of my words hung heavy in the air. We weren't trying to, Nina started, but Dr. Phillips cut her off. The concentration in the coffee you drank today was significantly higher than anything we've seen in your previous hospitalizations. If you had consumed it all, the outcome would have been severe, possibly fatal. Detective Mendoza turned to an officer. We'll need a full warrant for both their homes and offices, and reach out to the pharmaceutical company listed on these bottles. We need to know how they got their hands on these substances. Nina slumped back against her pillows, her energy drained. It wasn't supposed to go this far, she whispered. James kept saying we just needed one more try. I stepped closer, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. Every time I got sick, every meeting I missed, every client I lost, you two were there, watching, taking notes. What kind of people does that make you? The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, I heard officers reading James his rights. Nina stared at her hands, avoiding my gaze. I turned to Detective Mendoza. I'm ready to make my formal statement now.